Wife puts husband's loyalty to the test. I met Brian, the man of my dreams, in college. Although I was captivated by him at first sight, I didn't think I had a chance to even date him, let alone have a long-term relationship with him. He was so good-looking, so witty, so kind, so smart, so charming that he could literally pick out any girl in our college or even any female professor. His big blue eyes always seemed to be dancing, his muscular arms and chest heaving, and his lips tightening, at least to me. Every girl in my sorority flirted with Brian. Those who were lucky enough to date him swooned. The only thing they complained about was that he was too much of a gentleman. I still remember a comment Marg Simpson, probably the girl with the biggest breasts I've ever seen, made after her third date with him. How can this guy only want to make out and not have sex with me? One day, while sitting at lunch in the student union and reviewing my notes for a test paper for the next class, Brian came over to my table and asked if he could sit with me. I was almost at a loss for words. He was so pleasant and funny that I quickly calmed down. I ended up being 5 minutes late for class, failing a test paper because all I could think about was him, and very angry at myself for letting myself think that his friendliness was something more. Over the next few weeks, it seemed like Brian always ended up at my table when I was in the student union, and then shocked the hell out of me by asking me out on a date. He apparently mistook my shock for apprehension, lowered his head, and began frantically apologizing for being so cavalier. I surprised myself by lifting his chin, looking him in the eye, smiling and saying, "I'd love to. What are you planning?" Our first date ended with a kiss, and on the next two, we kissed. However, I was cautious because I knew I could fall in love with him instantly. I couldn't believe he wanted a long-term relationship, and I guarded myself so I wouldn't get burned. Halfway through our fourth date, we had a frank conversation. "Julie, I feel like you're really holding back in our relationship. Is that the right perception, or am I misreading something?" said Brian, holding my hands as we stood near a fountain at a local park. I decided to be completely honest and replied, "You're probably right. You're out of my league, and I don't want to get burned because I could easily fall in love with you." He laughed. His laugh was both relieved and joking. "Are you serious?" he asked. "I honestly thought it was because you consider yourself out of my league." "How could you be so impressed?" I started to say, before he pulled me to him and gave me the sweetest kiss of my life. When he finally let me come up for air, he said, "Let's both allow ourselves to be vulnerable and see where it gets us." Smiling broadly, I replied, "Okay," and then kissed him as sweetly as he kissed me. 2 dates later, we had a magical love epiphany. With no clothes on in his dorm room, his roommate was away and the door locked. His body looked even better than it did with clothes on. His eyes and lips told me he liked the way my body looked, too. The times I'd had sex before Brian had been more or less like slam, bam, thank you, ma'am. They were enjoyable, but far from amazing. Brian was different. We made love, and it was magical. I'll never forget looking into Brian's eyes the next morning and seeing something different in them. There was a clear gleam, almost as if his eyes reflected sexual satisfaction. I vowed to make sure that glint never went away. From that night until about 18 months ago, I considered my love life, and life in general, to be as close to perfect as it could be. Our bodies readily adjusted to each other, and our values, morals, goals, and personalities matched perfectly. We have been inseparable since that night, married right out of college, and now that we have both recently turned 50, still as in love with each other as we were that night. With the exception of about 3 weeks before and 6 weeks after I gave birth to each of our 3 children and only 2 extended business trips for Brian, the frequency and intensity of our lovemaking has never changed. Mind-blowing sex 5 times a week was the rule rather than the exception. The only time the sparkle in Brian's eyes disappeared was when my body was unavailable due to childbirth and his 2 long business trips. On both occasions, the sparkle returned to his eyes the second time we made love as soon as I was back in the field, or he was back in town. 18 months ago, shortly before we turned 50, with 3 grown children of whom we were immensely proud and 2 lovely grandchildren, things changed dramatically. It didn't change for the reasons often talked about on the show Loving Wives. I never cheated on Brian, and I'm sure he never cheated on me either. There was just no need or desire to. After about a month, my body began to become more and more sensitive during lovemaking. I didn't pay much attention to it at first, but when the pain caused me to interrupt Brian halfway through one night, we realized there was a problem. He was extremely concerned and thought he had done something wrong. I assured him that he hadn't, but clearly something was wrong. I promised him that I would see a doctor as soon as possible. I immediately made an appointment with my OB/GYN, Dr. Mary Phillips. In addition to a routine exam, she scheduled me for a pelvic MRI and ultrasound. I went back to see her 3 days later. 3 days without sex, when the results of my blood work and labs came back. After a few pleasantries, Doctor. Phillips got straight to the point. She is an unprincipled medical professional, and I always expected and received facts from her during pregnancy and routine checkups. Julie, the news is not good. I've consulted with several colleagues, not only in my practice but all over the country. No one has ever heard of anyone having all 2 conditions you have at the same time. Endometriosis and pelvic inflammatory disease, abbreviated as PID. I groaned. I don't know what that is, but it sounds bad. Well, 1 is really bad, and 2 can be. The treatment for 1 is exercise, antibiotics, and for the other there are 3 possible treatments, she said with a stern look on her face. Lay them out by severity, please, I said, taking a deep breath to calm myself down. Endometriosis is treated with exercise, including the Kegel exercises you did during your pregnancy. I think this condition was caused by your body's different reaction to them. If you do the exercises for a few weeks, this condition may be overcome, but it may not do you any real good. Great, I muttered. PID is usually treated with antibiotics. Your PID is not an STD, but appears to be caused by changes, for an unknown reason, in the microorganisms that make up the flora in your reproductive system. We'll have to experiment with different antibiotics until we find the right one, but hopefully, in time, the medication will rid you of the condition, she pointed out. Okay, but why do I feel like the axe is about to fall? I replied. Now it was Dr. Phillips' turn to take a deep breath before she continued. Unfortunately, because the axe is about to fall, you have the most severe endometriosis I've ever seen, and I'm surprised you're living as normally as you do. What exactly is endometriosis, doctor? I inquired. It's a condition in which the endometrium, a tissue, grows outside of the body. Usually hormones or surgery are used to treat it, but neither is permanent and may not be particularly helpful in your situation because of the extensiveness of your problem. Even a hysterectomy may not help because the implants of the disease are all over the pelvic cavity and feed on estrogen, which is commonly used in hormone replacement therapy after a hysterectomy, she replied, her voice cracking. I sat stunned. Do you have a recommendation? I asked. I recommend both a partial hysterectomy and non-estrogenic hormone therapy, but unfortunately, the likelihood that the pain will decrease enough for you to eventually have a normal love life is slim to none. I gathered all the information I could from Dr. Phillips, intending to start the exercises and antibiotics immediately and discuss other options with Brian. It was a bad day, a very bad day, possibly the worst day of my life. I won't give you more medical information because it's all just background, but instead focus on why this story ended up here. Brian was devastated. The sparkle in his eyes disappeared after a couple weeks when my symptoms not only didn't improve, they worsened. Sure, our lives didn't revolve around sex, but sex was always the whipped cream and cherry on top of life's ice cream. 5 of the 10 most memorable events in my life are entirely related to my lovemaking experiences with Brian. Since sex has been an important part of my life since I met Brian, losing him was even harder on me psychologically than physically. Brian showed the utmost sympathy and understanding, but the lack of sparkle in his eyes told me that he was having just as hard a time as I was. I tried my best to please him as best I could. That's how we ended up in love hell, or rather, unlove hell. Even though our relationship was as good as it had ever been, I was still constantly thinking about what we had lost. I even went to a physical therapist, but I just couldn't get it out of my head. I eventually came to terms with my condition, realizing that I had just lost an important part of my life, but coming to terms with losing Brian was harder. He had no physical problems. He was as sexy and strong as ever, but my problem was now his and our problem. In the process of coming to terms with my loss, I went through various stages of grief. At first, I was certain that Brian would seek love satisfaction elsewhere, although I had no logical reason to believe this. And although his love for me showed absolutely no signs of wavering, in fact, he made every effort to treat me even better, if possible, showing no signs of pity or sadness. It was at this stage of grief that I did an act that I now hate myself for, even though my physical therapist says my feelings about myself are too harsh given my situation. I checked in with Brian. In the major metropolitan area where we live, there is an organization, which I'll call RT, that advertises relationship testing. I personally went to them to get all the information I could about their services. In a nutshell, they gather as much personal information as possible about the person being tested, aka the subject, and then put them in contact with someone of the opposite sex of roughly comparable age, attractiveness, and intelligence who discreetly hooks up with them and records their reactions. Their operatives record the encounters with the subject, make every effort to interest him, but do nothing overtly sexual, and are expressly forbidden, on pain of losing their jobs and being blacklisted from having sex with him. Because Brian is as attractive and intelligent as is possible for a 50-year-old man, RT gave me a choice of 2 of their most attractive operatives between the ages of 40 and 55. I insisted on meeting both of them, something RT normally wouldn't allow or recommend, but my offer to double their usual fee convinced them. Cheryl was 45, had long red hair, a flawless complexion, a pretty, age-appropriate face, and a body that looked 25. She had a master's degree in public relations, and she was charming. I was very worried about associating such an attractive woman with Brian for any reason, but I decided to go all the way. Denise was 48, had medium-length light brown hair and a pretty face to match her age. Her body was more age-appropriate than Cheryl's, but she had perfectly, to Brian's taste, large in size, i.e. large, and properly shaped, i.e. really cone-shaped, knockers. She had a bachelor's degree in marketing and was just as charming as Cheryl. In an individual interview, I asked them both why they were working part-time in the relationship testing field. They answered in the same way. They loved the rush of the job. They had both been cheated on in past relationships, and it was the easiest extra income they could imagine. Their closets testified that they knew how to spend the extra money it brought. I hired them both for 2 contacts, first Denise and then Cheryl. I didn't want to know their contact plans, but I gave them enough information, and they had enough flexibility in their normal work schedules to come up with suitable scenarios. 2 months later, Mark, the RT director, provided me with a final report. Brian passed the exam with flying colors. He was polite, attentive, friendly, and completely disinterested. Both Denise and Cheryl gave their best in 2 contacts each. Moreover, they both stated to me that if they had been able to engage Brian in a loving relationship, they would have gladly given up their careers in relationship testing. Given those statements, I think you can assume that they put their best foot forward because neither of them had said anything like that before. I smiled broadly, but immediately felt guilty. "Would you like to hear the tapes?" Mark asked. "No, thanks. Your verbal report is all I need. Can I pay the bill in cash?" I replied. "No problem." Mark smiled as I counted out my money, tormented by guilt. That night, I resolved the myriad of conflicting thoughts and emotions that had plagued me for months. I knew what I needed to do. Brian deserved to be as happy as he could possibly be. I didn't doubt his boundless love for me, and I wanted to show him how much I loved him. The next day, after I had made the most loving love I was capable of with Brian, and we hugged as he thanked me fervently, I laid out my plan to him. "Brian, you don't doubt that I love you with all my heart, do you?" Casting me a perplexed look, he replied, "Of course not. And you can't doubt my love for you either, can you?" "Absolutely no doubt at all," I replied. "It is because of our deep love affair that I need to ask you to do something for me. Something that will make me happy." "Of course, Julie, you know I want you to be happy." "Brian, I can't be happy knowing that you are not sexually satisfied. I want you to establish a loving relationship, specifically with someone else." He laughed at first, and then, not seeing the smile on my face, he said, "Are you crazy? I don't need sex to be happy." "Brian, I know you better than you know yourself. And while I know you would never cheat on me, it wouldn't be cheating. On the contrary, it would be what makes you happy, but I can't do that for you anymore. And I'll never be happy if you're not happy." I tried to remain calm, but by the end of my words, tears came to my eyes. After a significant pause, he replied, "Julie, you'll be better someday. I can wait. I don't need anyone but you." "Be realistic, Brian. The chances of me getting better are slim to none. If I get better, you can end the relationship. Think about it. But think about it not in the context of hurting me, but in the context of making the man I love with all my mind, body, and soul happy." "I can tell you right now, no way. Get it out of your head," he replied, a little more sternly than I expected. I knew that would be his initial reaction, but I don't give up when I think I'm right about something. I've never given up, and I certainly won't give up when the happiness of the most important person in the world to me is at stake. So every day I brought it up again. I talked about it subtly, directly, insistently, jokingly, seriously, pleadingly, persistently, but never ever nagged, and only discussed it when we were as close as we could be. It took over 2 months, but one day, after I involuntarily flinched violently when he accidentally touched my body, when I brought it up again, he reacted differently. "You know, Julie, that you've been talking about this for over 2 months now. But how can this work without damaging our relationship?" he asked. "Oh, honey, please think about it. I'll write it all up and put it on your desk tomorrow when you get home from work. When you see what I've planned, you'll realize that it can't hurt us. It can only make me happy and you satisfied." I smiled broadly and began to caress his body. The next morning, I tried to be as cheerful as possible, kissing him passionately before he left for work. I had already prepared my rules of behavior, but I polished them up and then wrote them in my own handwriting and placed them on his desk in his office. They read, "Rules of Behavior. 1. You are careful and can trust her. This includes never telling anyone that we know about this arrangement. 2. She is not currently married. 3. She is being tested for STDs as obviously contraceptives will not help. 4. You will never, for any reason, bring her into our home. 5. You never tell me anything about her, and in fact, you never even mention her to me. 6. You never tell me when and where you and she meet. You don't have to give me a reason for your absence, whether it's bowling league, poker, working late, going to a basketball game with the guys, or sex. Just tell me your schedule, not what activity is planned, and I will never ask you about it. And 7. You can show her this document if you want. Please do that for me. For us, I not only give my consent, but I sincerely wish you would. Love, Julie." I didn't bring it up again. Brian and I continued our usual loving communication. About a week after I placed the rules of behavior on his desk, the document disappeared. 2 weeks after that, the gleam in his eyes reappeared. I couldn't predict my reaction when the glint returned to his eyes. I was both happy and jealous at the same time. It was all I could do not to try and figure out who it was. Knowing Brian, even though I had given him carte blanche to have more than one love partner, I knew it would only be one, at least after a trial date. While I certainly never knew for sure because I never took any interest in Brian's whereabouts, after a couple months I was already guessing at his schedule. Most likely he had sex twice a week, probably a few hours each time. He never brought home any evidence of this and was always willing to caress my body if I was in the mood for it. After a couple months, I stopped figuring out who, when, or how often. Brian's love for me came through loud and clear, and I never questioned my decision. Eventually, I did find out who, and quite by accident. I won't give the details because it's partly embarrassing. I only knew her tangentially. She was perfect for him. I was even more confirmed in my decision after my last visit to the OB/GYN. While I still had the original problems, another more serious one had emerged. Whether it was caused by other conditions, neither my doctor nor those she consulted with could determine. I had cancer, and had probably only 2 months to live. Tonight I will tell Brian about the prognosis. I will tell him that I hope he can find love elsewhere after I die, and if not, I will pursue it. However, I will ask him to wait at least 6 months before remarrying, if that is the path he chooses. I will go to my grave confident that I am a true, loving wife. The end! Subscribe to my channel. Thank you.